Hello, everybody. Welcome to Third Degree. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes in the hot shop with our first demo of the evening. Feel free to come in, take a seat. If you haven't had a chance to stop and grab something to eat yet or grab a drink at the bar, you probably just have time to run and get something now. And we'll be starting in just a couple of minutes.
Smile, now the sunshine brings the light. Fill me out with a flame. I will let you in this game. Take me out when I'm down. 'Cause with you I'm safe and sound. 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 I'm safe and sound.
All right, he explained it all right, so I can go home. You got it now? Okay. Maybe I'll tell you a little bit more. So welcome to Third Degree. I'm Jess. I'll be narrating this first demonstration for you. This is Ethan. He will be our artist, our gaffer, and he's going to make some really cool stuff. Did you tell him what you're making? Okay, so he's going to start with a bottle, and then he'll make a little nest of coral for it to sit in. So right now, Ethan has already gathered clear glass on the end of his blowpipe, and then he rolled it through some crushed colored glass called frit. The frit is kind of like aquarium gravel, sort of. It's colored glass. It's just been crushed up. And when we roll it through, because the glass is really hot, it melts that frit, and that fuses to the surface. So then he goes back into the furnace to melt it in, make it really nice and smooth. And then he's using a block, which is just a big wooden spoon. He's using that to shape the glass. He wants to get it really nice and smooth and even. Because when you put that color on, it's really chunky and weird, thick and thin, and he wants it to be like super smooth and pretty so that he can make his form and really control how that blows out. Right now he's rolling the glass on the marver. The marver is our metal table. We use that both for shaping the glass and for controlling the heat. Heat is really important in glass blowing because the heat of the glass determines how much it moves. So hot glass, you saw probably when he first gathered, if you were here when he was first starting, it was like orange and flowing and liquidy, right? Because it was super hot. As the glass cools, it becomes more rigid. So if we want that to happen faster, or if we want it to happen on just a particular part of the glass, we can roll it on this table, and we can either cool the sides or cool the bottom, and depending on what we want to do, we'll use it different ways to control the heat. We also have a torch. You can see there's a little torch going behind his bench. We can use that to control the heat too, to heat specific parts. So glass vessels are built in layers. If we want to make a big piece, we've got to get a lot of glass, but we can't get it all at once. We can't go in there and roll that pipe around and come out with 6 pounds of glass. That's not going to happen. If we want something to be big, we have to build it in layers, like a tree or an onion. It's going to grow gradually. So what we have to do is we get liquid glass, we let it cool down and solidify, then we can go in and put more liquid glass on top of that. If we want to make something really large, we might do that 5 times and just progressively make the piece larger. So that's what Ethan just did, is he gathered, we call it gathering anytime we go into that furnace, he gathered more glass around that base. Now you won't see that clear glass in the end, because you'll see right through it to the white. It's going to look like a white piece of glass. But almost all of the glass that you see in our gallery is in fact a sandwich of clear and colored glass. So right now, Ethan has to reheat it. So he went in, he got more glass, he used his block to shape it, smooth it, round it, make everything really nice and even, and now he'll start to inflate that to create the piece that he wants. So there's a variety of tools that we use when blowing glass. One of them that Ethan is using right now is called a blow hose. They can be a little unwieldy. Typically, glass blowers work in pairs, so you work with an assistant who would inflate the glass for you. But sometimes in a global pandemic, we don't share pipes and we don't want 2 people blowing into the same pipe, and we might use a hose. But he's using that so that he can shape the glass, and at the same time, he can inflate it. So that tube that's running to the back of the pipe is inflating the piece as he blows it into that block. That's allowing him to have a larger piece. So you can see that has gotten, it's not quite doubled in volume as he's inflating it. There we go. And then he'll just be able to pop that hose off the end if he wants to take it to the marver, or leave it on if he's just going to reheat it. So the next tool that he's probably going to use is called the jacks. These are the jacks. And we use these for a lot of different things. We use this surface for compressing the glass, and we use this surface for flattening it, and we can use this surface for putting in grooves like a spout, or for rounding out a handle. We can use the back surface as well if we don't want something quite as crisp. So all different surfaces are useful. on the jacks, and it's a pretty universal tool. First, he's going to start with inflating it just a little more using another really high-tech tool called a newspaper. We like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, not for their political content, but because they have a low color. They don't print a lot with inks that are going to mar the glass. Since they're mostly black and white publications, we like to burn those. Some of us might burn them for other reasons too, but we're not going to get into that, because sometimes the news isn't good news and it just feels good to set it all on fire. So he's going to spend a lot of time going back and reheating. Glass cools really quickly. So you only get maybe 20, 30 seconds of work time, especially if you're putting a metal tool on that's going to suck all the heat out of it, before you got to heat it up again. So you'll see a lot of back and forth, but when he goes into this furnace, all he's doing is reheating. There's nothing in there. Unlike when he goes into the other furnace over there, which is our melt tank, and he's actually gathering more glass. So right now he's putting in a line, using his jacks, squeezing in a line there, and he's probably going to stretch that a little bit. He's pulling away from the pipe, and then he'll put a second line in to break it off if he's going to make that like a neck on the bottle. Or if he were going to make a bowl, he could break it off right at that line, and then later he'll open it out. If you guys want to pass these around just to kind of get a feel for what he's doing there, feel free. So we've got a little bit of resistance on them. They're spring steel, so you don't have to squeeze too hard as long as the glass isn't too cold. So we are a teaching facility. We've had lots of students come through. Some of our instructors now actually started with our first classes back in 2003, and they're now very talented artists in their own right, and they teach classes for us sometimes. You can see a lot of their work out in the gallery. And if it looks like an exciting thing to do, there's information about how you can come in and take lessons or just have what we call glass experiences. Just come in and we'll help you make one thing. You come in one time and make something cool. So there's a lot of options for getting your hands on in here. So he's going to kind of keep working at that neck, stretching it out where he wants it to. Like I said before, there's a torch on the back of the bench, and it's very loud. But he's using it to heat a specific area. He wants to stretch that neck out a little bit, so he's just going to heat that part up and let the rest of it stay stable. So the next step, he's got to get what we call the jack line in. We call it the jack line because we make it with the jacks. And that's the space where he'll break it off of the pipe. When we gather the glass, we preheat our pipes. You can't really see it very well, but there's a little line of fire at the back there with the pipes stuck in. Because hot glass, molten glass, will form a permanent bond with hot metal. So when we take that hot metal and we stick it in to that pot, there's like a big, like a giant coffee mug without a handle. We call it a crucible. And that's what's inside that furnace. And so when we go in there and we roll it around like a big honey pot, it sticks to the pipe, and then it forms a bond that we can't break. We can't just slide it off of there. So what we have to do is make a fault line. We make what we call the jack line, and that's a space where it weakens the glass, and we're able to break it off at that point. There'll be a little bit of glass left over in the pipe. That's waste glass. Anything clear, thank you, anything clear we can recycle. Anything with color in it we can't, because if we put that color back in the tank, every artist who works after that is going to get streaks of that color in their work. So unfortunately, once it is colored, we can't continue to recycle the glass. But up until the point that it is, any clear glass that we've used, we can put back in the tank and use again the next day, the next week, whenever we get to that tank. So one of the exciting things we've done recently, we have 2 tanks, actually. There's the one that they've been gathering out of, and then on the other side there's another one. One runs on gas and one runs on electric. We recently installed solar panels on the ceiling here, and there's a battery array back behind the building. And so now when we're working off of one of the furnaces, we're actually blowing glass with sun, which I think is pretty awesome. So it's a cool thing that kind of we just started in the last few months. So Ethan is still working on that, getting that line ready. You saw him swinging it a little bit. Besides just looking cool, he was elongating the piece. So we'll use gravity and and swinging to make the piece a little bit longer, a little bit taller. So now he's going to start to squeeze in what I told you was that little fault line. So there'll be, the glass is strongest where it's round. So what he's doing is he's creating an angle in the glass, sort of a divot, and that's going to be sort of the weakest spot that there is in that area. So ultimately what he's going to do is he's going to break it off. So we'll do what we call a punty, which is where we bring a little solid rod with a little knob of glass on it, stick it on the end, break the piece off, and then we can work on opening the other side. They'll do that in a few minutes here. But first he needs to establish a place to break it. If he didn't put that line in and he just tried to break it off, the top would be really jaggedy and funky. And then it would be much harder to make a pretty functional piece with that really weird top. So by creating a really nice even line, you've got a good place to start, to open it up and have a really nice, delicate lip. So right now he's primarily heating the bottom, getting ready to shape the bottom of the piece. While he's doing that, I'll tell you a little bit more about Third Degree. We're called Third Degree Glass Factory. We're not actually a factory, though. Nothing in the studio is factory produced. Everything is made by independent artists. So all of us come in and we rent time in the studio and create work that we design and we determine what we're going to make. There are a few things that the gallery produces, that the studio produces by hiring artists to make a specific thing. And primarily those are the ornaments that you'll see hanging in the windows. We do a line of awards. So if somebody's done something really nice for you lately and you want to give them an award, we can make you a real pretty one in glass. And then we also do a lot of custom glass. And we do that everything from something for mom's 80th birthday to something for the entryway to your new corporate headquarters. So we have a full line of, from architectural to personal glass that we do as commissions here at the studio. All right, so you saw Ethan again using his jacks. He was using them to sort of flatten the sides of the piece. He's just refining that shape, getting it exactly how he wants it. So glassblowing is a challenging thing. The material itself, because it's molten, it's very hot, it can be really challenging to have your skin very close to it. But you get used to that. Most people take about a year of working in the studio before they really feel like they have some control over it. We get a lot of really free-form, organic shapes from our students, which is cool. And some of my favorite pieces are pieces I did early on before I knew what I was doing. I've been working in glass for over 20 years, so I can almost always make what I want to make. Ethan's been working in glass for, 6 years? 6 years. I think he's further along than I was at 6 years, but, he makes some pretty beautiful stuff. If you look behind you at there's this really pretty coral piece on a pedestal back there, and there's some of his work on there. You can see his inspiration is from the ocean. He does some seahorses that are really cute. So one of my favorite things about Third Degree is that we have artists who work in glass, but they work in different ways. So you're in the hot shop right now, and you can probably tell why we call it the hot shop, right? Everybody's getting a little warm. If it does start to feel like you're getting a little too warm, please remember we do have air conditioning in the gallery. There's also air conditioning through these doors, and there'll be glass demonstrations over there as well. So this is a hot shop. We work with glass big on these long sticks. In there, they work with glass on smaller rods or just working with glass rods in the flame working area, which is here. And then further on, we have our kiln forming area where they work with the glass cold, build things and create things, stick it in the kiln and fire it there, a little bit more like ceramics, and pull things out. So we have different ways of working with the glass. And as you go through the gallery, you'll see very different kinds of work. Because not only, and Ethan's getting everything nice and flat, so the paddle, wooden paddle, they're using just to flatten that bottom and to create a nice thing that will stand up, although it will be standing on the coral. It's not maybe as critical that the base is really flat, but it'll make it look, it just gives it a really nice finished look. So anyway, each studio, the work looks different when it comes out of that studio. And then each artist approaches it very differently. So my work versus Ethan's work versus anybody else's work, as you walk through, it's all glass, but it's such an amazing variety of work. So I really encourage you to take a good look at some of the work in the gallery just to see, we have artists who paint with crushed glass and then fire that into these images that are gorgeous. We have artists who work exclusively in one or another. We have artists who work in the kiln forming, create a shape or a image, and then bring it in here, pick it up, and wrap it in the hot shop. So there's a lot of crossover and a lot of really cool sort of experimental stuff. Right now, Ethan is making his punty. I talked about how we're going to flip that so we can work on the top. So this glass, he's rolling, so it's just a tiny bit of glass on the end of the pipe, and that's going to be a handle, not permanently, but temporarily, to hold on to this piece while the other end of it gets finished. So hot glass is sticky to other hot glass. So the temperature between those two has to be just right so that it sticks but it doesn't fuse. We call it fusing when they become a permanent part of each other. So what he's doing is just making it a little sticky. And then that line where he created that fault line, it just breaks away. When he hits it, it sends a shock down there, just a little shock wave, and that ripple moves in, creates a crack in that fault, and he's able to break it away. So now the bottom is finished, and he can work on the top. If you guys have any questions at any point, please throw a hand up, and I'll come over and make up an answer to your question and tell you more about who we are and what we do. So now that end that he has to finish is the coldest part of the piece. So first he's just going to make sure that it's in the middle, that everything's running nice and smooth and centered. But then he's going to have to heat up that end because it's much colder than everything else. He just broke it. If the glass is cold enough to break, it's definitely not hot enough to change the shape. So he's just using his torch to sort of preheat that area to warm it up. And then he'll go back into the furnace and heat up, but he won't go all the way in. He'll flash it, meaning he'll expose all of it to a little bit of heat to just warm it up, and then he'll really focus the heat on the part that he wants moving. So when we work with the glass, when it's on the blowpipe, we're really focused on the bottom half and finishing that out. Because once we transfer it, we can't get that part hot again, or it'll fuse to the punty. We can't change that shape. So now he's just going to focus on the part that he can change, which is the top. And he'll probably stretch it a little bit. He might trim the top to make it a little more even. We'll see what he does. Now, after we have transferred it over, we can still inflate it a little bit more. There's a tool called a soffietta, which we also call a puffer. And we can use that. It's that cone with a tube on it. There you go. And he'll be able to stick that in and puff it a little bit more to inflate and round out that shoulder. Sometimes the shoulder of the piece will collapse a little bit after there's nothing holding the air in when you go to heat it up. Or when you're opening up that lip, you might twist it a little bit. So being able to go back in there and inflate it a little bit helps get a nice clean shape to the piece. So who's been here before? Do we have people coming back? About half of you. All right. Thank you for coming back and seeing us despite knowing how hot it is. We appreciate that. If you haven't been here before and you don't know about the rest of the Maker District, in addition to Third Fridays being at Third Degree, where we started them, there's also now Craft Alliance just down the street on our side and made the makerspace across Delmar, and we really encourage you to visit both of them as well. They have demonstrations and artists working in both of those spaces, and it's an easy walk from here. They also have parking at both other locations as well. So the third Friday of every month, in addition to our activities here, there's activities over there as well. So we encourage you to stop and visit them. And if you don't do it tonight, just like, we all have public hours, and you can come see us another time too. So he's done a nice little flare on the lip of the piece. And he's just going back and heating it again to soften it up so he can work with it a little bit more. Are you stretching it? So he's going to stretch that neck out a little bit. Make it a little taller. This is not how they make the long neck bottles for your bud. Those come out of a mold. But we take a little longer. You know, they can make like 16 of those like a second in the big glob feeder molds. Ours take a little bit longer. But ours are way cooler. So the glass we work with is specifically formulated for glassblowing. It's a soft glass. Factory glass, that glass that your Anheuser-Busch bottle is made of, that's not the same kind of glass. Even though it's a soda lime glass, it's a glass that's mostly silica, and it's got the same basic ingredients. There's other fine ingredients in different amounts that make this glass able to do what we do. Factory glass is formulated so that when it goes into that mold, it freezes and it can come out and it can go down the line and we can put another one in and you can just crank those out. When we try to, there's some of our artists who will take factory glass and manipulate it in the furnace. It's really challenging because that glass only stays hot for a fraction of a second. You've got to be really quick. Versus this, which will stay hot for, and this is much softer than the glass we used to use. We used to only get maybe 15 seconds, and now we get 20, which is huge when you're used to only working in 15, and suddenly you have like an extra 5 seconds. You can get a lot done. So we've had this glass going on about 2 years now, and I'm still kind of getting used to the feel of it because it's so nice and soft. But it's just different formulas, different amounts of what the fluxes are, what the stabilizers are that make that glass different. But it means we can't take this glass and mix it with the glass in the next studio over, because their formula is different. It's designed for working in front of a torch. It has different properties. And the kiln-working glass, totally different too. So when you work with different kinds of glass, you find that they can't melt together and then cool down and stay together. They won't play nice. They're like siblings, right? They look kind of alike, but they're not alike at all. And you can't put them too close together or it's going to be bad news. So we can't cross over completely, but we can get sheets of glass that match this and use those in there and then fit them in here. Or we can pull out rods of this glass and then use them on the torch. So we can finagle our way around it, but it'll never be as good. This will always be best for what it's doing now. So it'll be harder for me to work it in there. And if I make something in there and then I manipulate it in here, it'll be harder for me. So the people who are doing that have some pretty mad skills, and they're very impressive. So Ethan is just turning back a little piece on the end of that. I have a question.
Why did he flare it out and then knock it off?
So the flare was just so that he could stretch it. It was giving him something to hold on to. And that lip, and when he broke it, that line wasn't quite crisp enough, or the temperature wasn't quite right, or any number of things might have gone wrong. So when he broke it, there was an extra little nub there. So he was going to have to trim it off anyway. So what he did was he flared it to use that to elongate it and bring it back to how long he wanted it, and then he just knocked that part off. And so he basically made a new jack line, tapped that one, and that one broke cleaner. So now he'll use that for the lip. Some of the, I don't know if we have anything in the gallery right now. Sometimes you'll have things that have like these really long like dinosaur necks, and they do that basically that way. Near the end of the piece, they'll make a little flare, and then they'll just stretch that neck way out. So it's kind of a traditional way of shaping a bottle. You can stick a message in there once it's under the sea and its little cradle of coral. Any other questions? Nothing right now? So the glass is really sensitive to temperature. Ethan is making this piece. He's working with the glass when it first comes out is right around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when it's really liquid and molten. it stops moving right around 1,000 degrees. So if there's any movement in the glass at all, we're at or above 1,000 degrees. We're usually working between like 1250 and 1600 when we're working at the bench. It's a lot of heat. We don't have a digital readout on the end of the pipe to tell us exactly how hot it is, but between what little sensitivity we have left in our skin and how much radiant heat is coming off of it and how it's moving, we kind of judge what we can and can't do with it from that. But once it's finished and it's sitting around that 1,000 degrees, we can't let it get too cold. Because if the glass cools and the outside cools more quickly than the inside, then the piece will crack because it'll form stress. So what we'll do with those pieces is when they're done, we put them in our annealing ovens. You can see these boxes over here. Each of those is computer controlled. It holds the glass at about 950. So we know that it's not so hot that it'll cause it to change shape. But it's not so cold that the surface of the glass will get too cold when we open it and put more pieces in. So once we've filled the annealer up, we tell the computer to send it down, and it brings it down over about 18 to 24 hours. How long it takes to come down depends on how much work is in there, because there's a lot of heat in there as we load it. So if it's hotter, it takes longer to cool down, because that heat has to sort of dissipate over time. But the computer controls it at a rate to make sure that the heat inside the glass can get all the way to the edge, and it only comes down a degree or two different from the outside and the inside. So the thicker the glass is, the longer you have to let it cool. So sometimes we have artists who will make really heavy paperweights or really thick glass, and they'll set it to come down over 3 days. The Hubble telescope mirror is a piece of cast glass that I think was 3 months the first time, and it cracked. And so I think they went like 4 months the second time to cool that. So they actually created the curvature of it by putting it in a spinning furnace that came up to molten, and it spun the glass. And so the force of spinning pushed the glass thicker on the edges. And so then they had to keep it spinning until it was cool enough to stabilize. And then they had to go in there and hand polish that surface. So it's a really cool scientific thing. And there's like this honeycomb structure on the back because it's not just like it's not like your glasses lens. It's a really like amazingly fancy engineered piece of glass. And there's pictures of the broken one. There's a place called the Corning Museum of Glass in upstate New York, and they have a piece of a broken one that you can see in their museum, and it's pretty awesome. All right, so right now, they're trying to park that one in the garage. So the garage is a place where we can put a piece to keep it warm, because like I said, if we just let it cool down, it'll cool too quickly and it'll crack. The problem with the garage is sometimes the temperature is not exactly where we want it to be. So we just have to keep a really close eye on it to make sure it doesn't melt into a sort of a organic bottle. So they're going to work on figuring out how to do that. Meanwhile, Ethan is getting ready to start his coral. He's taken a couple of gathers. And this time, he won't be blowing the glass. This will be a solid piece. So he's just going to do the same thing. He's going to take that clear glass, roll it around and fit. So he's going to twist it and make it, you know, a little bit wavy maybe. So this will be the base for it. You guys on the Jumbotron over there? Better go wave if you're on the Jumbotron. So we just got this really fancy system that used to be, so I started working here in 2004. My first time at Third Degree was actually their 1-year anniversary on Third Friday. So I can count how long I've been coming down to Third Degree from the third Friday in, I think it was October maybe, in 2004. So back then, like, we didn't have a sound system or anything, and it's just been really fun to like see the place grow and develop. But our most recent thing is we have multiple cameras that are not held up with zip ties and duct tape, which is really exciting. We have one that's actually like motorized, and there's like this cool little thing that follows you. There's like a triangulating science-y thing that there's little things around here that track your movement. And so like Ethan can walk around and it'll just like follow him. And it's so like, it's awesome. And then we're able to feed this live out into the internet world so people can watch it, which is pretty fun. What's your question? Are we going to do more after this? So we will have another demo after this demo. But Ethan's still got a lot to do on this piece. So he's gonna put a whole bunch of what we call bits, or other pieces of glass, and he's gonna build out a big piece of coral, like a tree. So he's got a lot still to do. And then we have another demo that will maybe be at 8, I think. I don't have the schedule. I think it's at 8, but that demo will be something completely different because all of our artists do different work. I unfortunately, when I do demos, I never know until right before I take my gather what I'm going to make, because it's a really fun thing to do demos because we're not constricted by, I've got to make something that I'll be able to sell and feed my kids. So I get to have like the most fun when I'm doing a demo. I really love it. But I'm not doing one this month, so come back next month and maybe I will. And last month I made, was it last month? I think it was last month. I made a chicken. I made a giant chicken. It was fun. But I don't necessarily know what I'm going to do until I get there. So I can't tell you what they're going to do next because I don't know. It's a mystery. The question was, is that water in the bucket? Yes, it is. So we use the water to keep the wood from igniting in flames. So the wood is a fruit wood. They tend to be cherry or pear because the sap content means that as you burn it, you get a layer of carbon because that sap kind of burns. And that carbon layer actually protects the wood from the heat. Ideally, if you have the moisture content right, so if you keep it soaking in the water and you put it on the glass, water will start to evaporate from the block, and that steam will push on the glass. And you actually won't ever make contact with the block, and the block can last you for 20 years. We're a teaching studio. Our blocks don't last 20 years because people just leave it on there, and they roll it back and forth because it feels like you're really doing something, you're getting a lot done. But it starts to smoke, and then you get little sparks. It's like a campfire. And our students will still be rolling sometimes, and you're like, okay, I think you could dip that in the water. It's nice and round. Move on to the next step. But yeah, the blocks, they are permanently in the water. We leave them in there overnight. We got a bunch of big vats back there where all the blocks live, and they stay permanently saturated. The only time we get in trouble is if someone leaves one out, because then the wood's going to crack. Because if you let it get wet and then dry, if you've ever spilled water on your coffee table, you know that's not good to let it get wet and then get dry. So we do try to avoid that. But instead of keeping them dry all the time, we keep them wet. Now the paddles, we usually keep dry. Those are used for shielding. So you saw before it was used to flatten the bottom. When he was making the bottom flat, he used that paddle. And so the second thing that paddle does is it shields you. When he's right over that heat, and you know, it's like 1,500 degrees, and it's 1.5 inches from your wrist, he's real hot. So if he just slides that wood paddle in between, it's like air conditioning. It's a beautiful thing. And we also use it if our assistant isn't moving fast enough. We can encourage them to move faster with the paddle. Not really. No one actually does that. But you think about it sometimes when you're like, I really need that bit, and they're not bringing the bit. So again, Even is using the jacks to establish a line. And they're flattening this out. This is going to be the base that it'll stand on. So it's just creating something a little wider to give it some stability, sort of flattening it down. What's up?
So if is it cold water, why doesn't that break the glass if it's such a big thing?
So the question was, why doesn't it break the glass with such a big temperature difference? Because the glass is still really hot. You actually can break the glass with it, but the glass has to get down under that 1,000 before it's going to break. And so you're rolling it, and ideally you only roll it while it's still moving. If it's stopped moving, there's no reason for you to have that on there anymore, because you're using it to shape. Now, I have seen students get the glass cold enough to crack the surface, rolling it in one of those. Or they'll scoop up the water and roll it in a big vat of water. Instead of, you're supposed to empty it out, right? So the only water is in the block, like saturated in the block, and you're not sticking a cup of water on there. But you'll hear it. If somebody scoops the glass, you'll hear a sizzle, where it creates some little chill marks on the glass. Fortunately, you can usually, if you're still blocking, you can probably go back in and heat those out. So right now he's holding it up, he's using gravity, he's created sort of a crayon point, and he's dripping that over it. That's going to give it a concave lower surface, which will be much more stable, sitting on a shelf, than something that we think is flat, but that really isn't quite flat. So a lot of times we will give things a concave surface just for the stability. How's it looking in there? Is it moving? That's probably good. Looks good. I haven't heard anything explode, so we're probably good, right? You usually hear them when they break. They make a pretty loud noise. So, all right, so now he can start building the coral. So right now they're just trying to build up enough glass to make that first bit. A bit is any additional piece of glass you put on the main piece when you're working. Most glass blowers do work in at least pairs, so it's pretty typical to see something like this. You have a gaffer, who is the person making the piece, and then you have an assistant who is going to bring you parts and help you open the doors for you, bring you punties, do all this other stuff. And your assistant is really like your most critical and important tool. You need somebody who understands what is necessary and can bring you what you want. So working by yourself, it's not impossible to make glass solo, but it's really, really challenging. So almost every glass blower you see will work with a partner if they can make that work. So the larger and more intricate the piece, the more likely you are to really need help. Some things, like those people who can make a beer stein and make a really beautiful handle with a nice fancy little nub, and they can do that solo. But I would say you're getting into like the top 10% of glass blowers at that point. Most people are not going to be able to do that just on their own, because it's really hard to keep the temperature right. It's not hard to do it. But you can't so you make a cylinder for your stein, right? You can't just take that and leave it sitting out while you go and make the handle and shape it and make it pretty, because that piece is going to have to stay hot. So what you need to do is be very ambidextrous and able to keep this one hot while you roll this one and shape it, and then heat that one up while you set that one on the bench, and then come over and have the right tools in the right hand and get everything to work. And then what do you do with that pipe that you just used? You got to put it somewhere. So there's a lot more to think about, and it's a lot easier to just say, hey, go get me a handle to your partner and have them bring it to you. So right now they're getting ready to add this first main section. Now up to this point, Ethan has not been wearing gloves. Most glass blowers don't, because turning the pipe is really challenging when you're wearing a glove. If you think about working in the garden with gloves on, trying to use tools, it's really kind of challenging. If you're working in the kitchen, you're trying to, get something, you don't have a lot of fine motor, right? But at a certain point, when you're going to have to do detail work inside this heat zone, you kind of need a glove, because your hand isn't going to be able to do what you want it to when it's that close. So he's going to be doing little intricate snips and twists and pulls and things right there next to the glass with it really hot. So he slid on a glove just to protect his hand from the heat. And when the glass is hot, it cuts just like Play-Doh. So he's going to squish this on there. And then he's got a pair of straight shears. And he's just going to be able to cut that right off. So he's got his first little stem for the coral. And then he can go in and adjust where it's sitting. And he's making a few more cuts to give it some branches. Now, every piece that Ethan adds makes this harder to keep it alive, because every joint is naturally a little bit fragile, because you've taken the glass at 2 different temperatures and you've joined it together, and it's not really going to be super happy with that. So it becomes more important to keep the heat perfect. If he gets it too hot, what's going to happen is everything's going to get floppy and mushed together. And if he lets it get too cold, its pieces will start to fall off. So the more intricate it gets, the more he adds to it, the more challenging it is to make it get all the way to the box. In addition, ultimately, he'll have to get it off of the pipe. And to do that, he's going to have to hit it to send a shock wave up there. And with all these delicate, intricate little pieces on there, it's been known to happen that when you go to break it off, it doesn't break where you wanted it to break. You lose half of the bits that you've added onto it instead of, I've seen people make, like giant turtles, and they go to break it off, and it stays on, but one of the arms hits the floor, So it's, you can kind of see what it looks like there. It's a little piece that he trimmed off. That is very hot, do not touch it. That will stay hot for like the next 10 minutes. So if you touched it, it would burn you. I'm going to slide it back a little bit in case it pops. Sometimes when they break, they'll sort of send the little pieces flying. We want to get those a little further away from you. So he's just reheating. In that case, he was reheating in that furnace that I told you that he gets the glass out of. Because when Ethan has to heat his piece up, there's not necessarily somewhere for him to fit in and heat up the other piece. So we sneak heat out of the melt tank. That's all right. Just don't want anybody to step on it or... So you can really tell where the heat is right now, because as he's working with the glass that he's using is blue, and you can kind of see in the coldest parts that the glass is turning blue, but in the hotter parts, it'll be glowing orange. Not for very long, but when he first comes out. So that's one of the ways we can read the heat, is we can look at where it's orange, and we can file in the back of our head how long ago it was orange. How long has it been since this had color? And that helps us to determine when we have to get back in the furnace. And you develop sort of a sixth sense about it, because once you've broken enough things, you know when that break's going to happen almost intuitively. So he's going to keep building up, and he needs to build up a large enough area to nest his bottle. So he's still got a little bit more to add here, probably. A lot of bits. Whew. Ready for October. October gets a little better. August is rough. So October's a fun time to come back, A, because it's not as hot, and B, because it's our anniversary and we tend to throw a really big party. We don't know how big a party we can throw this year. We're still like, we don't know. But we do a lot more stuff outside in October, too. We usually have the fire dancers. It gets dark a little earlier, so we have the fire dancers come and they dance. I think they're going to be here later tonight. But August is also the hardest for them because it doesn't get it doesn't get dark until much later. And so they can't really start their show until they have at least dusk. But by October, it's getting dark early enough that they can put on a really good show, and they usually do 2 shows, and it's super fun. COVID was the first thing to stop our Third Fridays since that Third Friday I came to in 2004. We'd had ice storms, we'd been up against World Series runs, we'd been up against all kinds of things, and we'd always done it, you know? So COVID's been the first thing that took us down for a year. We couldn't have open houses, and that was hard because it's part of what we love is sharing glass, right? It's a really magical material, and everybody here is really passionate about it, and we love having people come in and just see what a great material it is. And it's so much more alive when you're making it. It's alive when it's done too. You have these beautiful forms and these beautiful things, but it's a different animal here than it is out there. So we love to be able to share that with people, and we really hope that we get to keep doing that, and that we don't have to shutter again for a little while. Last month was our first open Third Friday in a really long time. So Ethan's got a few tools that he uses for shaping. Some of them are just giant forms of tweezers like you use to shape your eyebrows, and others are a little bit more specific. He uses those to sort of create the spacing and the shape that he wants in his piece. He's just really focusing on where the heat is, making sure that he doesn't let those little bits get too cold. And getting them adjusted to where he wants them. So Third Degree was founded by Jim McKelvey and Doug Auer. They started putting together the idea for it in 2001, 2002. And Jim tells us that the reason we're Third Degree Glass Factory is not, in fact, because of the anticipated burns that we would be getting working in the hot shop, but because when he went to the bank and he said, I've got this great idea for an art studio on Delmar in the city, that the bank gave him the Third Degree about it. So getting the bank loan was the most challenging part of the process. So Jim started blowing glass Jim and Doug both started blowing glass at Washington University. And WashU was shutting down its program, so they weren't going to have glass blowing anymore. And so they were sad, because they wanted to be able to blow glass because it's fun. So they're like, let's start our own studio. And so some of the equipment that we originally had came from WashU when they shut down. And fortunately, Jim had a lot of money, and Doug had a lot of time, and a lot of knowledge. And between the two of them, they were able to sort of cobble together a working shop. And I think they put an ad in the newspaper because you couldn't put anything on Facebook back then because it didn't exist yet. That said glass blowing classes. And they got 10 or 12 guys who showed up to this dump, and that ceiling was still caved in, and it was pretty grungy, and they said, we've got a deal for you. You help us tuck point the walls, we'll let you blow glass for free. And so they did. They stripped paint and they framed out walls, and the first crew that was here learned construction and glassblowing at the same time, which was a pretty good deal. And that was generation 1 of Third Degree. And a lot of those students have gone on to teach and manage other studios in other parts of the country. And some of them we've managed to hold on to. We have one guy who's still one of the people who I work with who was down here that first class and is still blowing glass. So the studio really built up from that sort of just a bunch of people who thought glass is cool. And we all kind of stuck with it and kept working and building and growing until now we're sort of the hub of what's becoming a Makers District. We're really excited when Craft Alliance decided they were going to move down here because it felt really like great to have a trusted organization who was coming down to join us and be our neighbor. And then Made is incredible. If you haven't been over there, you can build anything in that space. They have welding, they have computer-controlled everything, so laser cutters and routers, and they have a water jet that can cut through concrete. It's pretty awesome. So it's a membership-based thing. You can take classes whether you're a member or not. They've got a really nice fibers area. I do some fibers, I do some quilting, and they got a long arm quilter there, so you can do like really nice quilting. So one of the cool things is, like, I'm a glassblower primarily, but I'm also a crafter. I do all sorts of other stuff, and watching like things spring up around me where I can do pottery and I can weld something and I can do it all right here is like fantastic. And that's kind of what the people doing the development, that's kind of their vision, is we want to have a district where whatever it is you want to make or have made, there's a way to make that happen. And it all happens right here. So whether it's a robot or a piece of art for your front lawn, or even if it's just an experience of having a family reunion and doing something really memorable and making everybody a memento. Anything that you can think of that involves making things, we want to be able to facilitate it. And so that's really the idea behind the district. Doug will be, for the next demonstration, Doug Auer, who's one of the co-founders, is going to be talking, and I'm sure he'll talk a little bit more about the Maker District and everything that's going on, because he's one of the driving forces behind that. I'm just kind of on the periphery being excited about it all. So like I said before, as this piece grows, little by little, it gets more fragile and more tenuous and more challenging. So every time he goes in there to reheat, he's got to be careful, because as that glass softens up, it could just it's sticky. So if it touches itself, it's fused, it's there. So he wants to keep this really distinct growth pattern going. And now, my bad. I think, but I too. So looking. Let's see. Charged. That's no. Are there any batteries back here? My battery's just up and there's none in the box. All right, yes, there we go. I don't have to yell. That feels better. So I started out as a ceramicist. I did a lot of pottery in high school and college. I started blowing glass in college as well. And there's several people here actually who started as ceramicists and ended up moving into glass. Some still do ceramics, and some are just glass blowers or glass workers now. So they're a really natural, compatible set of materials, because you work them in similar ways. With ceramics, you're not working with them hot in most cases, but they're both rotational. If you work on the wheel, you learn about center, you learn about wall thickness, you learn about a lot of similar things that you have to know to be a glassblower, so it's a really nice sort of foundation. So if you're like thinking, hey, I want to come take a glassblowing course, but I'm a little unsure, you can go over to Craft Lines and take a pottery course first, learn the wheel, and then you'll be a natural in here. You'll already have it all down. All right, so now, the moment of truth. Eden's going to put a few drops just to create some little shock lines where that jack line is. And then he's going to hold on to it so that he's keeping most of the stress off of the coral, and it looks like it broke really nicely. You didn't even hear it, right? It was like super silent. That's a good sign. So now he's just flame polishing because it's sharp. We know broken glass is sharp, so he's just going to soften it. And then put a little stamp in there, or just smooth it. Smoothing it down. And now it goes off to the annealer. All right. And we made it. It was a bumpy road, but we got there. All right. So thank you guys so much for coming down and for bearing with us through the heat. I know it's hard not to go watch through the glass. We really appreciate you being here. We'll probably take about a 20-minute break, and then our next demo will start in a little bit. Thank you for coming down tonight. Come back and see us.